Welcome to the first episode of Game Suite Zone, where we try to pick apart various sounds and techniques that go into video game music. Today, we're taking an in-depth look at Jungle Adventure from Mario Party, composed by Yasunori Mitsuda in 1998. Let's start by getting the tempo, which is the music speed. I imported the original music into my music software and cut the silence in the beginning, so the music starts immediately, which is helpful for transcribing, which is an arrangement of a composition for whatever instruments you are using. Next, I try to line up my tempo of the music with our trusty metronome. Always use this to keep time. The tempo I got is 178.200, oddly specific. The time signature is simple, which is a standard 4/4, 4 beats per measure. One of the first things we hear is the bass. I'll be using a double bass for the notes, but any sort of bass can work. The notes are very simple and consistent. Ready? This will occupy our lower frequency range. Frequency in music is how many wave cycles occur in a second within a sound, so the more cycles per second there are, the higher the pitch and vice versa. We're going to be combining multiple frequencies, or instruments, in the music, so making the most of them is important. Anyway, the bass notes repeat for the entire piece, so let's move on. Next up are the congas, our main percussion. They're what I have that sounds the closest to the originals. If you need some, I found a sample pack that doesn't only have congas but other percussions free to download. The link is in the description. Use samples by importing them into a channel. Raise the pitch to match notes you want if your music software doesn't do that automatically. Anyway, we will use 2 of the sounds provided by my VST, and we'll be raising the pitches just slightly. However, we want it closer to the original, so I'll be boosting the lower frequencies through equalization, which lets us shape our sound by adding or reducing certain frequencies. We'll be reducing the highs, also known as a treble, and raising the mids and lows, which is also known as a bass. Listen to the difference. Finally, we will add reverb, which is basically resonance. It's the environment that surrounds our sound, and it's the difference between dry sounds and not so dry sounds. Sound waves reflect off of surfaces and mingle with the original. Try clapping in an open room and then in a very enclosed space. You'll hear the difference. What's that, buddy? Singing in a shower? That counts too. He speaks Chow, but I understand him perfectly. Right now, I'll be using a reverb preset. Hear the difference. We won't go crazy with the reverb when it comes to percussion. That would be too much for what we're going for. In general, try not to go too crazy with reverb when applying this effect to your sounds. It will be used on all of our instruments, however. This rhythm doesn't change either, so let's move on. So percussion also has shakers from what I'm hearing. Listen to every other beat. I'll go ahead and put them on the first beats too, to fill our percussion section a little more. Most of these note patterns repeat throughout the entirety of the music, just so you know. Anyway, there's more of a percussive sound on the third beats. Do you hear it? You can probably mimic this sound with a drum set, but we can replicate that a bit with tambourines, so they're up next. Plus, it sounds like a natural addition to the non-drum set percussion we're using, so that's good. Simply boost the mids and lows and decrease the highs. Although low, I'm fairly confident there's another sound on the first beats, so we'll use that along with our shakers. That's a little small, so I'll duplicate this instrument in a separate channel, but lower the pitch. I also decided to add a somewhat heavier percussion for the first beats, which is called a tabla, but any drum kit can probably do just fine as well. The percussion's done. Main melody time. We'll be using a tenor sax for the main melody, since that's the closest I have. DSK and DVS have sax VSTs for free, which I will be using. Links are in the description. The original's notes aren't very long in terms of sustain. They kind of pop, so let's keep the notes a bit short. The tenor sax is up. This is also part of Jungle Hijinks' theme from Donkey Kong Country, in case you didn't notice. This is called a leitmotif, which is a reoccurring musical phrase associated with a theme or subject, which is Donkey Kong in our case. Anyway, we got the note, but it feels a bit empty. Let's layer another saxophone under this one, but an octave lower. I'm using DVS saxophone for the lower notes, but you can always duplicate a tenor sax VST and change the preset. Anyway, simply copy the notes for the tenor sax, paste them in this one's piano roll, and lower it an octave, also known as transposing, which is moving notes down or up pitches in a consistent manner. Finally, I'll boost the mids on the tenor sax, the first one, and attempt to match its sound to the original. The second section of the music uses a harp, so I'll use a Celtic harp for my VST. Let's also raise the highs so it can stand out a bit more. The end notes are a bit percussive. After a lot of searching, the instrument used sounds a lot like a balafon, an African percussion instrument that's essentially a xylophone variation. It's not simply one note being played, but two per sounding. It's a chord, although chords usually have 3 notes or more. I'll boost the mids and decrease the bass and treble. By the way, here are some balafon samples I found, which are in the description. If you'd rather not use them, try a xylophone or marimba, only this time you'll duplicate the chords and put them up an octave, giving you 4 notes each hit. That'll make it sound much closer. Now, you may or may not have heard this sound before. Very strange sound, huh? Well everyone, get your microphones ready. Just kidding, it's an instrument. It's called a cuica. We won't use this for a constant rhythm, we'll only use this for interventions, also known as making a cuica cry. Besides lowering the mids and highs, we'll also increase the attack, which is how fast a note starts. Listen to the difference. The interventions are essentially the same sounds being played during pauses within the melody. For one cuica intervention, I'll duplicate the channel and lower the pitch of another sound, since our first cuica has a set pitch. Now, we're essentially done with laying down all of the notes, but we can do a little more, Let's add to this piece's character and style. Ever heard of a sort of springy sound? It's usually used in jungle or silly themed levels. This is a jaw harp. We'll put a higher pitch on our third beats. One last sound. This one may sound familiar. No microphone joke for you. It's an instrument. That's a didgeridoo. We'll use this to back up the notes of the jaw harp. I got it! Jerry. I'm calling you Jerry, with a G. Did Jerry do that? Haha. We will use this to back up our jaw harp, so this will be at a lower volume. Here they are together. To end the music, we'll use a common method, which is essentially ending how you start. It's a little too empty, however, so let's close it out with a jaw harp as well. Finally, let's end this with a typical production process, mixing and mastering. Oh, and panning too, which is essentially how far our sounds will go left or right through our speakers. For this piece, I don't want the panning to be all over the place. that may make listening with headphones a bit odd, so we will only slightly pan a few instruments through automation, which lets us set up what points our instruments will pan left or right. Important instruments like the percussion and what plays the melodies are centered for the most part. I'll pan the tambourines, jaw harp, and shakers. Our pattern for shakers is left, middle, right, middle. Can you hear the panning? Our pattern for the tambourines is left, middle, but it's very slight. Our pattern for the jaw harp is right, left, primarily done to contrast the shaker's left panning start. As for the mastering, mess around with what you think should be the highest and what should be the lowest in volume. Just experiment. Try to keep it under 0 dB, decibels, which is essentially how loud it is. You don't want distortion. Anyway, here are my results. The right knobs control the volume, so take a look at those. In the end, I ended up making the jaw harp, didgeridoo, and cuica low in volume. I don't want the former making too much of a presence in the music, but more so to serve the purpose of adding more character. The bass is around the volume of the congas and other percussions, while the saxophones, balafon, and the harp are slightly louder, just loud enough to understand and not too loud that they stand out too much from everything else. The tabla, which is our first beat percussion, is just loud enough to mingle with everything. We could also mess around with note velocities, which is how hard the instrument is played for louder or smaller volumes, but for this first episode, simply getting the notes down is good enough. Boom! What do you know? We finished taking apart and putting together our first piece from video game music. That'll be it for this episode. Stay a little longer to listen to our result. If you'd like to hear it on loop, I have it on my music channel. As usual, if you have suggestions as to what I should tackle next, let me know and I can take it into consideration, so long as I can manage it. Thanks for watching. Jerry and I will see you next time. Say bye, Jerry.
Okay, bye-bye!